Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the AquaBrain. I'm your Virgil Drew. On today's show, we're going to talk about through hiking, adventure running, and a bunch of other artistic stuff, expressions. My next guest put us up at his place when we were over shooting for Skate the Snow over at Sitzmark. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome the UltraPedestrian, Ras Vaughan. Blessings, Ross. How the hell are you, man?
All right, blessings, Drew. It's good to see you. Hey, I'm just I'm at a loss for words, which is a rare thing. No,
Yeah.
I'm doing good. I'm doing good, man. It's just life, so there's always challenges.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is, but we're always moving forward.
That's cool. And you guys got yourselves a dog, I saw. A little, what, Guthrie?
Yep. Guthrie, he's an Australian Shepherd. He's a full-blooded Australian Shepherd, but he's not papered. His mom was papered and his dad wasn't, but he's from pure Australian Shepherds and actually from a working ranch a little bit outside Boise, Idaho. So
all right.
Yeah, we've got a lot of connections to Idaho. We love Idaho and have spent a lot of time hiking there and enjoy spending time there. So him having a connection to Idaho was just perfect for us and was worth it. So it was funny though, because when we went to get him, he's just coming up on 5 months. So this was just a little over a month and a half ago.
Yeah.
We were supposed to meet in Kennewick, right? And we're coming from Whidbey Island. So it was supposed to be like, a 5-hour drive, have lunch, get the puppy, drive home. And it happened to be during that big snowstorm.
Oh, jeez.
So as we're heading, Snoqualmie Pass gets closed as we're just going up it. So we're stuck there for hours. The folks coming from Idaho, one of the passes over in Oregon got closed. So they got stuck over there. So it ends up being this crazy thing with literally just some of the worst driving conditions I've ever seen on Snoqualmie, right? And we took Snoqualmie because it's 1,000 feet lower than Stevens, thinking, no problem. So it ended up being, 3 days to do this 1 day journey, like 2 nights. And it was pretty crazy.
Adventure.
It was. So kind of the perfect way to start off with Guthrie, since he's supposed to be an adventure dog anyway, is to, basically put our lives in peril in order to even meet the little dude to begin with. So,
well, pictures look pretty fun. You guys are having a good time with them.
Oh yeah, definitely. But he is exhausting. He's a lot. Just not only the puppy energy, but Australian Shepherds, they've got a lot of personality and a lot of really specific traits. They can be pretty bossy. They're really intelligent, which is great because he already will jump through a hoop. I can hold a hula hoop up. Yeah, and he'll already jump through that. So he's super smart when he's motivated, but he's also smart enough to get himself in trouble by, it seems as though he's figured out the link between receiving treats, and he's kind of figured out that if you do good things, you get treats, but it seems like he's also figured out that if you do a bad thing and then do a good thing, you maybe get a treat faster. It seems like he's acting out in order to then correct his behavior and get a treat. Yeah.
So one of the disadvantages of having a smart dog.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Because a lab would just be like, just wagging his tail, waiting for a treat. But you can see his little brain working and trying to outsmart you. So
I'm going to go rip this cushion apart and then I'll go, then I'll sit and then I'll get a treat.
Exactly. Yeah. Then I'll sit on command and I'll get a treat. So
cool, man. So Hominid Up, the squad cast.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, over the years, a bunch of times we've had people kind of ask and be like, hey, how can we support you guys? We love what you're doing. And you put all this stuff out on social media and we'd like to help support you. And so a couple of years ago, just real quick, we put together a Patreon page just so that we'd have some, an answer to give those people. And we've had people be really generous over the year. A friend of ours reached out a couple of years ago and set us up with one of the InReach transponders, like the newer satellite transponders where you can message from it. And it's super cool. So we've had people ask over the years and we were kind of like, we'd heard about Patreon and didn't really know. So we set that up, and a couple of people, before we even really had it set up, we just started it and didn't really even have anything we were offering, we're like, oh, we'll send you a sticker, because that was what we had.
Yeah.
And a couple of people joined and started supporting us. And we're like, okay, this is super cool. And we want to do something because it means a lot to us. So we had that idea of starting a podcast. And I mean, we did a podcast a bunch of years ago, just called the UltraPedestrian podcast. And my approach to it was just wrong because I was coming from the idea of producing music, right?
Oh,
So I was
gotcha.
putting just way too much time. I was going through and editing out every little and breath and and
Right.
I was producing it like it's not even like a mixtape, but like a studio album, and just putting way too much time into it. And again, this was like 5 or 6 years ago, so the sort of standards for podcasting hadn't entirely been established yet. And now that they have been, it's a much lower bar than an official audio recording. So I was just too uptight and trying to make it too perfect before and got burned out, and we stopped. And so now we started it again. So Humming It Up, that's what it is. And we call it a squadcast because we really just don't want to put out another of, the million and first podcast that's just out for everybody and that nobody's listening to. We wanted to do something just specifically for our Patreon supporters and not worry about it, not be like, yeah, we're not going for 100, 1,000, 10,000 listens. We're just going for those, whatever, those 9, 20, 40 listens of the people that actually care enough to give us $1 a month or whatever,
Wow, man. No, that's very smart.
Yeah. So that was just the idea. And, so we got a few episodes out, and then we were on our adventure this year, doing the Wild Idaho Loop. So that was 60 days that we weren't able to put one out. And then when we got back, we just had some whatever personal garbage, real world life stuff getting in the way. And we finally overcame that and put that to rest and got doing episodes again. So that's where the Squadcast is at. And so Humming It Up, that's a concept. It's kind of like when people say cowboy up, time to cowboy up, or cowgirl up, right? Meaning that it's time
Get on your horse.
Yeah, it's time to make it real. It's time to take action. It's time to put aside all the fluff and distractions and excuses and to actually make something real and do it, right? So it's taken off of that idea, but with the idea of us as hominids, right? Rather than humans, we get all caught up in this, I'm a modern human, I've got a cell phone, and and I drive to work and all this stuff. And all that is so alienating from our real essential humanity. So that idea of hominid up, the idea is let's strip away this modern stuff and get to the real grassroots nuts and bolts of what it means to be a human being by thinking of us more in terms of our ancient selves, even sort of proto-human, back into the bigger hominid category.
Well, and you guys are doing some crazy stuff. The idea of through hiking and adventure running. Can you tell me a little bit about, first of all, how did you get started in through hiking? What was it like? We're going to take this trip and we're going to hike all these miles, like you said, the Idaho Loop was what, 600 miles or something like that. What got you going?
Man, it's funny because my story as a hiker and runner and all that has really ignominious beginnings, considering that now we're famous adventurers and stuff and known for it. But my very first backpacking trip was with my Boy Scout troop when I was, I don't know, about 12. And that was an odd thing because I didn't fit in with my troop. I'd actually gone to a private school and they all went to the public school, so none of them knew me. And I was a little dork, right? Because I was back in the day. Now I'm a big dork, so it's totally different. But I was a little dork then. And Stray Cats was my favorite band. I loved Stray Cats, Brian Setzer. So this lets everyone listening, after you Google Stray Cats, you'll know how long ago this was. And I had a Morris the Cat t-shirt that my mom had got me by saving box tops off of cat food and mailing them in. This is a long time ago, if I made that clear. And on the back of it, in Sharpie, I wrote Stray Cats. And I would wear that under my uniform shirt to Boy Scout meetings. And when we'd have game time, I'd take off my shirt and have what I thought was my super cool Morris the Cat Stray Cats shirt. And all the other Boy Scouts thought I was a dork and hated me. So these are the people I'm heading off into the woods with. So that's really fun. And I didn't know anything. I'm hiking in jeans, carrying some big fluffy cotton sleeping bag, just super ill prepared, which was funny. But this was in the 80s in Southern California, right? And our troop gets delayed. And looking back, now that I know what I'm doing, looking back on what we were doing was insane. Like
Yeah.
parts of the trail were washed out. We got off the route and we ended up with these
Whoa.
3 Boy Scout leaders leading like 20 Boy Scouts through a flooded slot canyon.
Oh, geez.
And I remember the walls coming in and it getting narrow, like maybe 15 feet wide. And it's like, good golly, it would only have taken a cloudburst upstream to have wiped out the entire troop.
Ooh,
You know,
that's
I mean,
scary.
yeah. So, but anyway, on that, so we're a day late. It's Southern California. It's the 80s, and you've got 20 white kids lost in the woods. I mean, they literally sent out search and
Yeah,
rescue
right.
like right away. We were only 24 hours overdue, you know, but
Yeah.
all of a sudden, you know, big, huge helicopter. Oh, I don't know my helicopters that well. It's a big military kind with like 2 rotors. Is that a Huey? It like
Oh,
comes in
geez.
and lands across the trail. And they start ushering Boy Scouts in and strapping us in. Yeah, and flew us out. So my
Wow, what an
very first
experience.
backpacking trip, we were hauled out by search and rescue on a helicopter. Yeah, so that's how this all began way back in the day. And then I didn't do a lot of backpacking. And then I got really fat.
Well, you know, that
You
happens
know,
sometimes, you
yeah,
know.
your
Yeah.
metabolism changes. And I was making horrible food choices. I was driving a frozen food truck all day. So I literally had an inexhaustible supply of ice cream bars and stuff right behind me. And I would eat a box of ice cream bars every day while I was driving around.
Oh, geez. Yeah,
Yeah.
when they're right there, it's
And I don't
easy
mean
to
like
do.
a retail size box with 6. I mean an institutional box with 24 ice cream bars.
Oh,
And
man.
yeah, or I just eat, you know, half gallons, right? Have a spoon in my truck and just grab one. So not good lifestyle choices. I ballooned up to like 265 pounds. And at that time, Kathy, we were fairly recently married. I mean, I wasn't that big when she married me, right? But a few years in I was.
Oh,
But she was always just like, oh, let's go on a hike. It's your day off. But I was working 6 days a week, up to 15 hours a day. So sometimes I was doing 90-hour weeks. And on my day off, I
wow.
didn't want to go anywhere. I just wanted to sit on the
No.
TV and drink a 2-liter bottle of RC Cola and eat a
Right.
couple family-sized bags of Doritos, right? Relaxing, as I used to call
No
it.
ice cream, right? You had to take a break from ice cream.
Yeah, right. I fasted from ice cream on the 7th day. But fortunately, Kathy just kept being like, no, let's go on a hike. And just, you know, encouraging me and even kind of shaming me and teasing me and just doing whatever it took to get me to do it. And so every once in a while I'd go on a little day hike with her, and less than a mile in, I'd be bent over on the side of the trail, like clutching my spasming back, unable to continue. But she just kept encouraging me and making me do it. And slowly I got a little bit more fit to where I could actually hike a mile or two. And then it started engaging me, and I started enjoying, like, you know, climbing up and getting to this cool lake that you couldn't drive to. You could only get
Yeah.
there if you walked there. So little things like that finally started clicking. And then she had the idea of hiking the Wonderland Trail. So that's a 93-mile trail that circumambulates the base of Mount Rainier.
Okay.
And it's, looking back, I don't even know why she thought that I would be able to do it.
Oh,
You know,
man.
it wasn't even a reasonable expectation. And our daughter was 7 at the time. Angela was only 7, but I loved the idea of it. I grew up reading adventure books and, you know, things like Treasure Island and Last of the Mohicans and stuff like that. And I always pictured myself as a classic adventurer out moving through the wildlands and the defiles, trying to find my way.
Yeah.
So I loved the idea of it, but it was hilarious that any of us thought we'd be able to do it. And yet we were, but for the record, it took us 21 days
Wow.
to hike 93 miles. So if you
Well,
do the math, it's not impressive
no.
mileage.
But you got it done, though.
We did get it done. In fact, I remember it was an issue because the Park Service would only issue a 14-day permit because they didn't expect it to take longer than that for anyone. So like our permit expired. We're still out there. We ran into rangers. They're like, okay, I'll radio it in and let them know you're still going. But we finished it. And for me, that really was the turning point. Like after
Yeah.
we did that, I was just like, oh, I can walk around mountains. I didn't know I could do that. That's a really, you know, that just like kind of exploded in my head. It opened up all these incredible possibilities that I really didn't think I could even do. And we had a glimpse on that trip too into even bigger things. And it's interesting looking back to me how many times I dismissed things at my first exposure to them. But on that first Wonderland, we were in this place called Indian Bar, which is literally one of my favorite places on the whole planet. It's just absolutely beautiful. It's like a campground that's down at the base of this valley, like a receded glacial valley that runs. You can look right up to the summit from there. It looks like it is really a false summit, but the perspective, it looks like it. And there's usually mountain goats, climbing up on the canyon walls,
awesome.
and you frequently see bears in there. Just a beautiful spot.
Very cool.
So this glacier-fed river coming right down through it. So we're hanging out there. I think we had a 0 day, and we see this guy come running down off the Cowlitz Divide, which is one of the ways into Indian Bar. And he was an extreme minimalist because he was naked.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So like
extreme.
so like Kathy's covering, Angela's eyes, because she's 7. And he obviously was experienced with this, because as soon as he saw us, he like whipped out a pair of shorts and stepped into them, almost before we could tell what had happened. But
yeah,
it's still kind of puzzling because I'm not exactly sure where he was carrying them.
Oh, jeez.
So I guess he maybe just had them bunched up in his hand, or because there's, limited other places he could have tucked them away. But whatever, he whipped those out real quick. But we could tell because, he didn't have a pack. He had nothing. So, and because of where that spot is, there's not a lot of road access. So we knew he had to be covering 25 or 30 miles to have no gear and getting from one car to another.
Yeah.
And at the time, I know that I, at least, and probably Kathy too, just sort of dismissed it. We're like, wow, that's super cool that this guy can do that, but he's some sort of superhuman athlete, and we could never do anything like that. But it's still kind of, it's set this little ember. Yeah, it just showed me it's humanly possible. And that's where my brain usually ends up going after that. It's like, okay, well, if something is humanly possible and I'm a human,
right,
then that means I might be able to do it. I might not be the specific human, but maybe I can. So over the years, that just fascinated us, the idea of being able to have a larger serving of trail and to cover 20, 30 or more miles sort of in a sitting like that, rather than just having a slice of pizza, like sitting down and eating a whole freaking pie,
right.
That was what began to interest us. And so we started running and learning how to do that. And neither of us is fast. We don't win race. Well, I think we each have won 1 or 2 races where nobody else signed up for that distance. Okay. Which is a legitimate win, right?
But you got to cross the finish line,
right? And right? Even realistically, if you're running a 50K, 31 miles, even if you're last, you still beat the other 350 million people who didn't get off their soda or their sofa that day, right?
Exactly.
So got to put it in perspective. But we found that even though we're not fast, that we were able to learn and develop this level of grind where we basically would never stop. There's a level of endurance where we can just keep shuffling on, and it might be pretty, it might not be pretty, and it might not be impressive, but we can just keep going and keep going and keep going. And so we ended up trying these different distances and running a 50K and a 50 miler, the 100K. I remember when on a 20-mile run with a friend where he told me that he thought I could run the Cascade Crest 100 miler. And I just had figured that wasn't even on the table, but something about just having a friend say, I think you could do it.
Yeah.
Again, just kind of knocked down these barriers in my head. And I was like, really? I could do that? Well, if I can do it, then I probably should. So I signed up for that. Turned out I could do that, ran a few different 100-milers. And the thing is, there's a bunch about it, which is really just fascinating to me. You can see this is what just lights my brain up.
Yeah, no, I love it. Yeah.
Talking about adventuring. But there's a point, like what interests me is what's possible, is seeing if I can do a thing. So then once I've completed a couple 100-milers, I still run hundreds, but it's just not my whole thing. I'm not always going back to the same race and being like, okay, can I shave 5 minutes off my time? That's fine. That's a legit way to play the game. It's just not the form of the game that interests me. To me, it was more like, okay, I can solidly run a 100-miler. And then I heard about a 200-mile race coming up, the first one that was being put on in Washington. And I thought 200 miles, okay, that sounds impossible. I better give that a try.
Yeah.
And again, I was able to do a 200. and on that, when that happened, when that Von Fawn held that first Pigtails Challenge 200 milers, the first one in Washington State, I think it was only the first 200-mile race in the United States.
Do you remember where it was?
Yeah, it's down around Lake Young's, down near Kent.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not like a mountain course where you start in one place and end at a totally different place. It's a 9.4-mile loop around the lake.
Oh, gotcha.
So you have to do a short, like a 3-mile out and back to start off, where you just run a mile and a half, then run back, and then you do 21 laps, and it totals 200 miles.
Wow.
So it's interesting because since you're doing the same loop over and over again, navigation isn't an issue. You've got the course memorized after a couple of loops.
Yeah.
So the route, the course itself isn't part of the challenge, really. It's almost a strictly mental and athletic challenge of like keeping yourself going when your body's just telling you over and over again that it wants to stop. And that's like really what's fascinating to me, is that place where your own body and brain are trying to sabotage you and make you not achieve your goal, and you have to learn how to override those sort of fail safes that are built into us.
So, do you remember what you placed in that race? Not that it matters. You finished, so that's
yeah. I can't remember off the top. I think I was maybe 7th out of 9.
Wow.
I mean, there were not many finishers, or maybe, I could look it up, but I don't have it off the top of my head. But I did at one point, one year I came in, I think 4th overall, which made me the 3rd place men's, because there's a woman that finished ahead of me. And at that time, that was my first ever podium finish.
Wow.
3rd place.
That was a 200 miler?
Yeah, it was a 200 miler. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you looked at it and you said, oh, that sounds impossible. Okay, I'm going to go do it. And then you end up having your first podium on that race, man. That's awesome.
So, but that's in that pocket where it's getting into my specialization about just being able to keep going. But all of that really it's not physical. I think that from my experience, physical conditioning tops out at about 50 miles. Like, there's a difference in your physical conditioning between performing at a marathon, right, which is 26 miles, or a 50K, just 31 miles, and a 50 miler. It is different levels of physical conditioning. But beyond a 50 miler, I think that's about where it tops out. Like, when I line up to start a 200-mile race, I'm not 4 times as fit as when I line up to start a 50-mile race.
Gotcha.
It doesn't have to do with fitness. It's the mental aspect. It's being able to keep making your mind move your body forward. And then it's fueling, like learning what foods you can eat, what food your body will respond well to and can metabolize while you're working like that. And then dealing with sleep deprivation, being able to make good decisions while you're sleep deprived like that.
So how long does it take to run a race like that?
Oh, let's see. My fastest time, my best performance, which was the time I podiumed and was around, I think it was the 3rd year I ran that. I've actually run that race 6 times. Yeah, so it's silly. I've done 1,200 miles around Lake Young's. My best time was 63 hours.
Okay, so that's when the sleep deprivation comes in.
Yeah, and that is with laying down for 2 or 3 hours, at least 2 of the nights involved, because
you just can't.
Yeah, I mean, I can do a 100 without sleeping. I can go 24 or 30 hours like that. And when I was first doing it and it was really exciting, it was easier. But now I'm in a really calm place when I'm doing it. And in some ways it's self-defeating because I'm not thinking, oh no, I'm going to fail. I just feel like I've got this. And so I can almost get too relaxed, and I can literally fall asleep while I'm upright on my feet.
Oh,
yeah, which isn't good because it's kind of shuffling or maybe speed hike, like not a full-on run like you would imagine. But but I can actually be like upright on my feet and start when you're first drifting off into sleep, and you'll have a really weird thought because it's part of a dream thought that doesn't make any sense. Yeah. And when you first snap back awake, you need a split second to realize reality from that dream thought.
Sure.
I'll have that while I'm moving. Some of them, and like, that's interesting because that's when you're getting into this realm of sort of where it's near hallucination and you really kind of can't trust your entire brain. Like, I remember, pardon me, one project I did was called the Rainier Infinity Loop with Gavin Woody. And so I've since Mount Rainier was kind of the foundation of our adventuring, I keep wanting to go back and do different projects around Rainier, you know, to have a more and more complete experience of that mountain. And I'd heard about this project that Chad Kellogg, he was a famous speed climber out of Seattle who died climbing in South America on Mount Fitzroy a few years ago, unfortunately.
Oh, man.
And one of his climbing partners is a friend of mine, David Gottlieb, and he told me about this project that Chad had always dreamed of, which he called the Rainier Infinity Loop, where he would cross the summit, he'd traverse the summit of Rainier using the Disappointment Cleaver and Emmons Glacier route, and run back to where he started on the Wonderland, and then traverse the summit again, and then run back in the opposite direction. Oh. So if you were looking down on it, it would form a figure 8 or an infinity loop.
Yeah.
And I started realizing, like, wow, this has that grind aspect to it that's going to play to my strengths. Like, I know the Wonderland. At this point, I had completed the Wonderland, I think, 11 times, 10 or 11 times. I, after that first 200, I attempted a double Wonderland and completed it. And I became the first person to ever do 2, consecutive Wonderlands in a single push. And I reversed direction when I bounced, because the concept there was to have as complete an experience of the trail as possible, because your experience changes based on the direction.
Yeah.
So by doing it once in each direction in a single push, I was trying to have that complete experience. And that was where I really kind of realized, okay, in adventuring, you can be creative. Like, you can invent, you can take a trail that thousands or tens of thousands of people have done, but you can create a new and interesting and unique way to experience it. And that kind of birthed this whole thing we do instead of fastest known times, where we go after only known times. We try to be the first and only people to have done a thing. So I had this possibility with the Rainier Infinity Loop, and I was looking for a partner. For one thing, I wasn't an experienced enough mountaineer for the Park Service to grant me a solo permit for Rainier. They're hard to get. They still won't grant me one, because I still keep trying. I'll get one eventually. But so I knew I needed a partner, and my glacial travel skills, I didn't think were up to par anyway. And there were very few people that I could even think of. There were very few people at the time that even existed who had the endurance and ultra running skills combined with the glacial travel skills and climbing skills to do this. And Gavin was one of the only ones. And we were able to do it. So we ended up being the first people to complete the Rainier Infinity Loop, which still blows my mind. I mean, that is easily one of the biggest accomplishments of my whole life. Mike Gauthier mentioned it in the newest revision of the climbing guide to Mount Rainier, and said that Woody and Vaughan changed the concept of what's possible on Rainier. Man, which is, that chills, is just like, dude, that's awesome. Good golly, right? If I have a headstone, like if my remains aren't just lost somewhere in the wilderness, then maybe that'll go on it, or maybe just an infinity sign. But yeah, that still blows my mind that I was able to do that and get those sort of props. But since then, of course, that was in, I think, 2016. Since then, maybe 5 or 6 teams have completed it. Gavin and I did it. We did 2 unsupported loops. So technically that makes it self-supported, because we resupplied at our cars in the midpoint. Gotcha. But after we did the traverse, we carried our ice axes and harnesses and crampons on the trail all the way back. But so since then, some guys have gone and done like a supported speed one, where they do the traverse, then they drop off their mountaineering gear with a crew and, be met with food, and they run back. And sometimes they even had a tent to take a nap. So I think Gavin and I, we did it in 98 hours, and now the fastest time is down around 55 hours.
But were you even trying to set a time? Because you were like,
yeah, I mean, we were, our goal, we did definitely want to come in under 100 hours, but again, to me, what's fascinating was the idea of whether this was possible.
Yeah. Cause that's,
And
You were
there's
the first
different
ones.
ways, yeah, exactly. And to me, that's what was fascinating. It's like, yeah, this is the way we did it. We went this direction, we used this gear, and we set what I think is the standard for good style on that route, which is not driving all around the mountain 4 or 5 different times,
Yeah.
investing fossil fuels to place and retrieve gear and drop off your crew. To me, like, good style, and that's a mountaineering term, where they talk about ethics, and that's what it means. It's like the difference between climbing Everest without oxygen and setting your own ropes, or using oxygen and having Sherpas set ropes and haul gear for you, right? I'm not putting any of it down, but what's fascinating to me is good style, right? And we did that in good style. And some of the people that have followed us have, and not everybody has, but that's fine. I'm not trying to disrespect their efforts. Peeling that off in 55 hours is crazy, but that's not what we were trying to do. We wanted to do it in good style, and we did. And I still think that actually sets the standard for anybody wanting to do that route. And generally in mountaineering, that is the way it's looked at. But again, we didn't invent this route. It was Chad's route, and he had shared with people that he had intended to do it supported style. So I think that fastest record, that was what they said, is they wanted to do it in the style that Chad had imagined that. And I respect that. I mean, no matter what,
Yeah. I was like, all right, fine.
But talking about hallucinations on the Rainier Infinity Loop, after we'd done both summit traverses and we'd done about half the trail and we're in the middle of the remaining 60-mile loop, it was like 2 a.m. and I think we were probably about 80 hours in at that point, and we had slept for maybe 5-6 hours at different points total, and we're just moving along the trail, and I felt like I was moving really well. And then I was kind of dreaming. I sort of had a dream, and I was sort of time traveling too, because I must have been back in the 1990s, because I was like sorting through CDs in a box, like digging through crates of CDs in like a record store or something.
Yeah.
And flipping them and flipping them and flipping them. And then I woke up and I was actually like messing around with the leaves of, like brush on the side of the trail. I was like flipping through the leaves, imagine in my, asleep, flipping through CDs in my brain, but my body was actually just flipping through the leaves of the brush on the side of the trail. So then I was like, okay, Gavin, I think I need to lay down for an hour.
Yeah. That's a good sign. I'm not making any progress here.
Yeah, right. I mean, and that's the thing. That's part of what's fascinating, is knowing when you can make those decisions. I mean, some people, if they laid down at that point, they'd go out for 8 hours and it would have a big effect. But Gavin and I were both experienced with it, and we knew that we could just put on our down gear and lay down in the middle of the trail, and the one of us would wake up in an hour or so and we'd get going again. So
yeah, it's just fascinating. It's fascinating. Hey, I want to change tracks a little bit. I know.
Yeah, I kind of hijacked the conversation there. Sorry.
Hey, man, this is all super fascinating. I didn't know a ton about what you've been into until I did a little research, and I love to hear the stories. I'm sure you can probably talk for hours about stories. In fact, we'll get to a story that you documented here in a little bit, but I wanted to ask you about rhythms. Are you still doing the reggae and making rhythms and stuff?
I really haven't been for a few years. Yeah,
Sick Donkey.
Sick Donkey Records, big up the crew over in Tenasket. I worked with those guys for a bunch of years. I was blessed to have my album Forward Out of Babylon be the first album that they ever released, and had all those guys, Blue Jay and Essential Eye and Huckleberry, on the tracks. But like, what I find in life is that there's like every day I wake up and I'm like, okay, I've got 50 freaking awesome things I want to do, and there's just not enough time in the day. So I try things and I push on things, and something captures my imagination and I put effort into that, and other things too. And I'll push on all these different things. And sometimes you push on something and it's just stuck. And no matter how hard you push. So at a certain point, I'm just like, well, awesome thing number 1 is stuck, and awesome things 2 through 50 are going. So I'm going to put a little effort into that. And
Gotcha.
music just kind of reached that point. I worked pretty intensively on music for a bunch of years and put a lot of time and money and effort into it, and had some amazing experiences. Got to meet a bunch of amazing people and travel places and be part of the scene, and do things I never thought I'd be able to do. But it also reached a point where it was just like, I'd be over in the Okanagan, have to drive over the pass in winter to go play a show at some little bar in Seattle, where there's a few good people there, but there's not a ton of people there, and it's
Yeah.
barely covering my gas money. And
Right.
even though I'm singing all these positive messages, hoping to inspire people, at the end of the day, my job is really just to be like, all right, last call for alcohol, be sure and tip your waitress, and I
Yeah.
just I got bummed out at a certain point. It's like, I'm actually paying money to travel hundreds of miles away from my family to help this establishment sell alcohol. That wasn't my musical dream.
Yeah.
So I actually have about an album of new songs that were written and never recorded. And so I do plan to record those at some point. Just last year was the 10th anniversary of Forward Out of Babylon. So I was
Man, that's
partly
crazy.
thinking, isn't that crazy? Yeah, I didn't realize it had been that long. Um, so that had me thinking about music again. And I have about an album to record. So I definitely want to record that. And it's on my mind, but I haven't been actively doing much musically for the last 4 or 5 years.
Well, it's good. It's good to hear that it is on your mind. I really enjoyed that album, and I want to thank you for letting me use some of the tracks and the rhythm in my videos.
Okay,
Um,
totally. Yeah, that was great.
stuff's awesome. All right, so let's go back to adventure running and stories. You and Kathy, you recorded a story. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? I'm referring to the book.
Oh, okay, yeah. Thank you.
Sorry.
It's like, we've got a YouTube channel and we've got the Squadcast. So I'm like, yeah, we recorded a story. Which
What
one, Drew?
story?
Which
Yeah,
one are we gonna
sorry,
talk
man.
about? Oh, no worries. I like the moment of suspense there, where it's like, where are we going? What are we doing? Um,
And we'll have links to all that stuff down in the description. So go check them out.
yeah. So a few. Cool. I like when I can't talk. My brain gets ahead of my mouth.
I know, and I stopped editing these things too. So
Excellent. That's cool.
because I'm shooting for live. That's what I'm really shooting for. So make
mhm.
sure you subscribe and hit that bell because once I get 1,000, I can do this
Nice. Yeah,
live.
right.
So
I know we're on that goal too, trying to hit the 1,000.
go and subscribe to him too.
Yeah, please do. We're at 734. So if you can do the math, why can't I do it with 266?
Sure.
266 people, please go subscribe to our channel. Like Drew saying, then we can get the community tab and we'll get everybody to subscribe to him too. And let's all break the YouTube algorithm. It doesn't have to be all reactors and corporate channels.
Yeah. Let's just have
Anyway,
conversations. Let's
yeah.
hear about adventure running and
Tell each other our freaking, inspirational stuff that everybody's got. So with this fascination of ours of trying to set only known times and do something no one's done before, there's with through hiking, right? So through hiking, long distance hiking, that's hiking the big trails in the country. And through hiking is specifically hiking a trail from one end to the other
like the
without
PCT or
without interruption.
something
Yeah,
like that.
exactly. So the big three, the triple crown of through hiking, is the Pacific Crest Trail, the Continental Divide Trail, and the Appalachian Trail. And that's where, especially a few years ago, that's where everybody's attention was. And there's all these other trails, they're smaller trails because they're 800-mile trails instead of 2,600-mile trails,
Oh
right?
man.
But they're still amazing and they're very different. So we had learned about the Arizona National Scenic Trail, which is a 800-mile trail that runs north and south from the Mexico border to the Utah border, where you
Huh.
walk across the entire state of Arizona, which it has all of those cartoonish scenes that you're imagining with like flat desert and saguaros and jackrabbits and scorpions and rattlesnakes. But there's also a lot of mountains, which you're probably not imagining, which we didn't imagine. But there's tons of times on that trail that you're up at 9,000-10,000 feet, and the whole last 100 miles or so of it on the Kaibab Plateau, you're at 9,000 feet, even though it's flat. So
Wow.
we had hiked that trail once, and while we were hiking it the first time, and actually the first time we did it, Kathy set the inaugural women's, pardon me, fastest known time for the trail, because no woman had ever made an effort and followed the protocols of announcing their intentions ahead of time.
Oh.
So she was technically the first women's fastest known time on the AZT. And I think we did it in 33 days, 35, not crazy fast, but it actually matched the original men's fastest known time for it.
Cool.
But yeah, but during that, so the AZT, it's in the desert, so you can't do it in the summer. You have to do it in the spring or fall. It's just lethally hot in the summer. So there's this limited window, but when you can do it between snowmelt and overwhelming heat, or between overwhelming heat and the monsoons in the fall. And so that challenge was like so interesting. And I was like, wow, what would it take to actually yo-yo this trail, to be the first people to start at one end, hike to the other end, and then turn around and immediately hike back to the first starting end?
And time is not on your side, right? So
exactly. Yeah. You can't just go as long as you want. You're going to get either snowed out or roasted out at one end of that. So we had actually done that and become the first people to yo-yo the Arizona National Scenic Trail.
Man.
And then I found out, so then I'm like, okay, we loved this 800-mile desert route, and it was 1,600, of course, when we doubled it. And I started finding out these other desert routes that were all in about that same 800-mile range. There's the Hayduke route and the Oregon Desert Trail and the Grand Enchantment Trail. So we decided to attempt to yo-yo all four of those. And we did the AZT, and the next one on our list was the Grand Enchantment Trail. And that's the adventure that we got our first book out about. And so
is that the 98 days?
98 days of wind.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the Grand Enchantment Trail goes from Phoenix, Arizona to Albuquerque, New Mexico. And it's not like the Pacific Crest Trail or even the Arizona National Scenic Trail. It's not an official trail where there's reflective signs telling you where to go all the time. It's more of a route. And there's a lot of cross-country travel. There's a lot of old, unmaintained trails. There's some bushwhack sections.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not an easy route. And we were specifically doing it according to a feet-on-the-ground ethic. So we were not only hiking all of the mileage on the route, but we weren't hitchhiking into town for resupply. We were walking all of our resupply mileage as well. Oof. And the Grand Enchantment Trail doesn't have a lot of resupply points, and some of them are 30 miles off the trail. So
man,
we weren't doing those. We weren't hitting those far-flung ones, but because of that, we had some sections where we had 150 miles in between resupply. So yeah, if you want to figure food for two people for 150 miles, it adds up pretty quickly. So
when you don't have 60-pound bags, right?
Well, with that much food you do. Yeah. So it's funny because you can have an ultralight kit where your base pack weight of your clothing and tent and sleeping pad and sleeping bag is 10 pounds, but then you've got literally 40 pounds of food. Yeah. And some days on that, we had 20 or 30 mile stretches where there wasn't water because it is through the desert. And water weighs a lot too. So yeah, it's totally possible to be an ultralight backpacker and on a route like that end up having a 50, 60 pound pack.
Jeez.
So
you're not running with that.
Oh. No, with that one, we're not. Yeah. That's straight hiking. So that's the story. 98 days of wind. That's the story of our attempt. And it was a failed attempt to be the first people to yo-yo the Grand Enchantment Trail. But I don't want to give out too many spoilers for people that do want to read the book, but some crazy things happen. I mean, just mostly from us trying to adhere to this feet on the ground ethic. There's this one section through what's called the Chilili land grant. And this is a land grant from the King of Spain that predates the United States.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So this is fascinating. And this is part of what we love about long distance hiking is when you travel across a state and when you walk in and out of towns when you travel in and out of towns on foot, you have a totally different experience of those communities than when you just
Yeah,
zip through in a car.
exactly.
So the Chilili land grant is, it, like I said, it predates the United States. It's a land grant from the King of Spain from before the US was even a thing. And somehow it has this legal status where it's grandfathered in under that. So in that area, there were no trails that were public that you were allowed to use. So the route just takes you onto the shoulder of the highway. And no, like over the years, I've drawn a kind of weird conclusion, but
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that Kathy and I are rain deities.
Oh yeah.
I'm pretty sure that we're like rain gods, and that wherever we go, water vapor just wants to congregate and rain down its love upon us. Because when we hike across the desert, there's flash floods.
Oh geez.
It's
That's not
crazy.
what
Like,
you want.
yeah, when we did the AZT yo-yo, at one point, I mean, very early on, like the third day, we crossed, there was this big rainstorm, and we crossed like 30 different creeks. There were 40 of them. They're running knee deep. And I shot a little video and posted it. And a friend of ours who worked for the Arizona Trail Association commented, and she's like, I've never seen any of those draws running with water.
Oh wow.
And it's like, well, yeah, all 30 of them are, because we're here and this is what we do. We gather water. So I hope eventually that, like, we'll become known for this, and drought-stricken communities will hire us to come walk through their area to bring weather
Yeah,
with us. So
exactly.
just like when we went to fetch Guthrie and it brought on the worst storm of the winter, same thing. We get to the Chilili land grant where we've got this 15-mile section where we have to hike on the shoulder of the highway, and it's all private property, and you're kind of not allowed to do anything else than that. And it's in the fall, and this freak snowstorm comes in.
No.
So it starts raining at first, and we're like, oh, okay, it's going to rain. We'll find a place to sit out the rain. Because a lot of the time in the desert, that's all it is. You just take a break for an hour and it stops and you keep going. And I saw these 3 big culverts. And so we're like, oh, let's step in here. So we go into the first culvert, and it was really perfect. It was maybe about 6 feet tall, maybe 7 feet tall. I don't think I had to bend over in it. So big culvert, and there was enough sand and sediment settled in the bottom that it was actually flat rather than being, rounded out. So we were sitting in there, and I think we were making coffee and waiting for the rain to stop. And we look out and we see that the rain is turning to like pellet snow. And it's like, oh, okay. And then we look out a few minutes later, and it's turning into flakes. A few minutes later, it's like Pringle size flakes, like potato
Wow.
size flakes. Everything's white.
Oh wow.
So yeah, it wasn't just it snowed. So we ended up living in that culvert for 36 hours.
Oh jeez.
Yeah, so we're in this culvert, and the traffic stopped. We on our MP3 players, I realized at one point that we had an FM radio setting. So I went to that and was able to get the NPR station out of Albuquerque, because we were not that far from Albuquerque at that point. And they were saying that the New Mexico highways was saying, don't go anywhere, don't drive anywhere, wherever you are, just stay there. The highways were closed down. So there was very little traffic above us in our little culvert home.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were able to set up the tent and just live in there for a day and a half until the snow melted, and then continue on with the hike.
So is that yo-yo, you said failed attempt? Is that something you guys are going to try again, or was that enough?
Boy, I won't say no. So definitely not a hard no. It's possible that we'll try
Yeah.
that again. It has probably more to do with time than motivation, in that there's, we only get so many years on this planet, and there's so
Sure.
many different adventures we'd like to attempt. So I don't know if we're that close to trying to repeat that one yet. Plus, who knows? I mean, 10 years from now, the way that things are going, who knows what the condition of the trail or weather patterns will be like. It
Sure.
might even be more doable. But yeah, we kept getting delayed by stuff like that, by snowstorms in the desert that had us living in culverts for a day and a half. So on the way back, we were about 300 miles shy of completing our goal, and it was just getting too late into summer, and it was getting dangerously, dangerously hot. The very last day, we were like, okay, if we can hike at night and sleep during the heat of the day, then maybe we can finish this thing. And so we pushed through this night, and we're both just exhausted and feeling horrible, and we couldn't find a place where there was enough shade to set up our tent and sleep during the day. And at one point, Kathy accidentally left her sleeping pad in the direct sun for a few minutes and came back and it had melted.
Oh, that's a good sign. It's time to throw in the towel on this one.
Yeah. And then, so that happened, and a friend had been coming to meet us with some supplies at that day. And we had basically already decided, gosh, that this is dangerous. We're probably taking our life into our hands if we keep going. And then he showed up with word that a big forest fire had started, that had closed off a big chunk of the trail anyway. So it was just over with. We couldn't attempt, not adhering to our feet on the ground method and sticking to the official trail. So, but that was also when we got back. Kathy had lost crazy amounts of weight on that trip, and she'd been just thirsty the whole time, which in a lot of ways, it was hard to see what those symptoms were, because you're losing weight, because you're hiking all day long, carrying a big pack. You're thirsty because you're walking through the desert where it's hot and there's limited water sources. But she also had other things going on, and she went to the doctor afterwards, and it turned out that her pancreas, she only has 60% of her pancreas, because she had 40% of it removed about 10 years ago due to a growth on it. And the remaining part of her pancreas had stopped producing insulin, and she had become a type 1 diabetic while we were out on this adventure.
Whoa. So the forest fire and everything, it all just kind of was like, meant to be, really, that you guys didn't finish that, because it could have not ended so well.
Yeah. I mean, it was life-threatening, and we had no idea that she had developed this condition. I didn't even know that was really possible, that could develop like that. So, Yep. So that ended up being just another nail in the coffin of that project. But I mean, that's what it's all about, right? That's the whole point of an adventure. It's not an adventure until something goes wrong. If you make a plan and you go out and you do that and everything works out perfectly, then that's a good day, but it's not really an adventure at that point. You're kind of just executing an itinerary.
So the ultra-pedestrian philosophy, what if you had to kind of just give it a thesis, or just a couple lines, what would you say that is? I think you've already kind of said it, but
yeah, ultra-pedestrian, that's a term we made up, and I actually came up with it after that first 200-mile race, because running those distances, they call it ultra running, and it's really a bit of a misnomer, especially for the slower back of the pack runners like me and Kathy. Like a lot of people right now, anytime I say running, they're picturing, Usain Bolt, or they're picturing a guy in a singlet, just running super fast, sprinting. And that's not what we do. What we do is really slow. And we hike a lot, even during ultra running. We hike all the uphills, you speed hike. And when you're 100 or more miles in, your speed hiking isn't very speedy. Sometimes you're just barely even kind of shuffling along. So I wanted to come up with a term that encapsulated using a broader variety of forms of bipedalism rather than just calling it running. So I came up with the term ultra-pedestrian to mean ultra, covering distances greater than a standard marathon, pardon me, and pedestrian, moving on 2 feet. But I really like it because it has another meaning. Pedestrian can also mean kind of commonplace or lowbrow. So ultra pedestrian can also mean exceedingly commonplace. And we really embrace that because we don't feel that we're doing anything that other human beings can't do. Like, I really dislike the whole athletic myth that's put across in the running industry and just in a lot of professional athleticism of like, we're super athletes, we're better and different than everybody. Like, to me, what's fascinating about running and long distance hiking is that it is very, very much essentially human. It's moving on 2 feet is one of the only things that actually differentiates human beings from the other animals. So I really enjoy that ultra pedestrian can mean exceedingly commonplace, that it implies that covering crazy distances on foot is something that everybody can do, because I honestly believe that's true.
It's funny because when I think of that, I don't think of any of those things. when I look at it, uh, I think that um, as a pedestrian, I think of observing things, which is your definition makes way more sense than my definition. So, but I think of when you're running these loops and these trails, or when you're through hiking and stuff, the stuff that, especially on yo-yo, because it's basically like you said, perspective of how you're heading on the trail. Um, you're getting to witness so much when you do these hikes. I mean, just to think of all the hikes that you've been on and how much you've seen, and all the rock formations and the waterfalls and the wildlife that you've happened upon, or the valleys or the meadows, or all that stuff. And that because I like walking around town, um just so that I can kind of drink it in, and I
Hmm.
can observe people. And so from my perspective of pedestrian, that's kind of what I envision the ultra being. This is observing nature in a different way,
Yeah, yeah, like
basically.
immersing yourself in it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm not
No, I love
100% sure.
I love that meaning too. That's great. And that ties in with what I was saying about how when you enter and exit a community on foot, you get this totally different experience of it. Um
Yeah.
so like it's funny because the way that I enjoy experiencing wild places is also my favorite way to experience civilized places. When you're out on the trail and you've just had your dehydrated food for 8 or 10 days, and you ate up all your special treats a bunch of days ago, or you're even like running low and rationing, and you're hiking along the side of the road, and all of a sudden you see that first mini mart on the outskirts of town. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. I mean, it's like you hear a choir of angels and a light shines down on it, like,
Right.
it's just, yeah, you
But
never appreciate a mini mart until you walk into one from like the desert like that with no food in your pack, and you're like, oh my gosh, all the calories.
I know, I bet. But does something, is that at some point something switches where you're like, okay, let's not get too carried away. I can go and I can eat the fried chicken that's in the thing, but that's really not going to help me going forward on this trail. Um, is that some of that conditioning that you were talking about? The
Um, I mean, kind of, but when on a through hike, when you hit town, I mean, we're vegetarian, so we're not going to eat the chicken, but I mean,
Right.
there's really not a lot of limitations because on a through hike, you're running a calorie deficit no matter what. You
Gotcha.
can't, you can't carry enough calories each day to replace what you're burning each day. So when you hit town, especially if you're taking a 0 day, yeah, it's really
Okay.
it's not about micronutrients, it's
It's
about
game on.
macronutrients. It's just about pounding as many calories as you can. Yeah, if you can turn a chocolate cake into subcutaneous fat, that's what you want to do because you're going to burn it when you're out on the trail again.
Man.
So
Well, I'm glad.
it really is interesting, and to me that really is like part of how you connect with this almost proto-human experience. Before human beings had farms and manufactured food and distribution systems like we have now, where you never run out of food, right? I mean, that's a very
Yeah,
new
there's something.
development in human history. The whole reason we store subcutaneous fat is so that we can, when we have a lot of calories, we can eat them and carry them with us and live off of them later. So you get put into a very different mindset when you're experiencing life that way. And it's kind of funny, like you almost get this sort of hunter gatherer mindset, and you'll be out on the trail and you see a piece of wire that's fallen off of a side by side or a four-wheeler, and you might grab that piece of wire because you're like, oh, I could use that to mend the handle on the pot, or I could use that to clean this. You see
Yeah.
things very differently. You see them as resources rather than just as disposable or pieces of trash or something like that. So like anytime we hit a little diner or something on the trail and we're getting some food, and it'll just be like, oh, look at all these creamer packets, I'll just put a couple of these.
Yeah.
Like you end up kind of being this modern forager, and it's like they have them on the table, they want us to use them. So
Yeah.
I normally don't drink cream or sugar in my coffee, like on an everyday basis, but it's hard not to grab those little packets of calories and just stuff them in my pack for later when you're in that scavenging mindset.
Yeah. Now, do you, what's the word? Um, I know there's a word for it and it's coming to me. So I will just explain what it is. When you go and you find things that are naturally growing that you can eat. And I know
Foraging.
there's, okay.
That's a word for it anyway. Maybe
Yeah.
it's not the one you were looking for, but
No, I know there's some other term, but
pardon me.
do you guys do that as well? Do you look for things that are edible on the trail or?
Yeah, we do that depending on the project. So on through hikes, we totally do that. On something like I did an unsupported traverse of Washington a few years ago, where I used the PCT and I just, on that I did a lot of running. So I ran and hiked across Washington State without resupply. So on that project, I was following a really strict unsupported ethic. And so part of that ethic is not only not receiving outside help, but it's only eating off of the supplies that you carry with you. So for instance, on that trip, I was not foraging because I was specifically trying to do it according to this unsupported ethic.
Gotcha.
Through hiking, you're generally following more of a self-supported ethic where, because you stop at stores and you mail supplies ahead to yourself.
Yeah.
And so foraging is definitely part of that. And so yeah, we do lots of berries. Like the amount of berries we found on the Wild Idaho Loop was crazy. And we've lived off grid for a bunch of years and both have done a lot of wild crafting and just gathered wild food anyway.
Wild crafting. I think that
Okay.
was the word I was looking for.
So yeah, Kathy and I both know how to identify, a lot of edible wild foods, like, I don't know what, purslane and stinging nettles and cattails and things like that. So yeah, when we find those out on the trail, we'll harvest them and add them into our food.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, hey, any advice to somebody who's, besides going and getting your book and reading your blogs and listening to your podcast, anything that could help somebody maybe get started in this if they were interested?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much information now. It's crazy because it used to be, even 10 years ago, 20 years ago, if you wanted to hike the PCT, you had to carry lots of maps and know how to read them and know how to navigate with a compass. And you had to try to track down people and get information about resupplies. Now to hike the PCT, you can download an app and just follow that from the Mexico border to the Canadian border. And it tells you resupply points. You can even order food and have it delivered. So it's pretty amazing the sort of information that is available right now. So it's pretty easy to just even check YouTube and do some Google searches and find lots of resources. I really encourage people to literally just get out on the trail. Whether you want to run a little bit and you're going to go out and just bag 3 miles after work on your way home, or you want to invest your whole Saturday in climbing up to an old fire lookout. I think it's really important to just get out on the trail and start doing stuff, even if it's a trail in your local park, even if you're doing laps around your neighborhood, getting used to being outside in all different types of weather, getting used to being outside in the dark, getting past all these really kind of modern things that have been piled on top of us where people are literally afraid of the dark. You can go out on the trail and turn off your headlamp and just sit on the side of the trail and just experience it. And you can feel the fear. Yeah. It's okay. I mean, we have those responses for a reason. But that's one thing I always encourage people to do is like go out on the trail, even if you're only a little bit away from the trailhead, sit down in the dark, turn off your headlamp and try just being there for 30 minutes and see what your brain does and feel the fear and hear the little things moving. You'll hear little night birds moving or rodents, and they might sound like bears or cougars, but they're probably not. Right. You know, you might see eyes shining in the bushes. And I've been face to face with both bears and cougars on a bunch of occasions, but it's actually really rare. When we lived off grid, we didn't have power. So we didn't run a ghost light that lit up the whole yard. Each member of the family just had a headlamp. And if you had to go out to the outhouse, you'd, grab your headlamp and go out to the outhouse. This wasn't at the camp where you saw us. This was our
No.
little cabin. So we got used to that, to being in the dark, surrounded by dark, just lighting up whatever little circle we needed lit up to do our thing. And I would always see eyes. And when we had first moved out there, I'd be afraid of them, just like people are. And I got to the point where I was like, you know what? I'm just not going to be afraid anymore. If I see a pair of eyes shining, instead of moving away from them, I'm going to go toward them. I'm going to turn my light on and I'm going to see what eyes those are. And it was always deer.
Yeah, really.
When you first see it, it always feels like a cougar or a wolf. You always think, oh, that's a predator. And it's not. Yeah. And it's to the point now where, like, I can just see the silhouette, or I sometimes just seeing how the eyes move. You can tell, because you know what a deer does. You know that a deer stands up tall and turns sideways so it can see out this eye, and it'll put its head down this way to look that, and so you see what the eyes do and you're like, oh, that's a deer. And then every once in a while it's up on top of a rock and they're big golden eyes and they just sit there staring at you, and you're like, okay, that one's a cougar. I'm not going to walk directly beneath that rock because that is a large cat waiting in hunting ambush.
Yeah. So I was going to ask, have any scary encounters with wildlife?
I mean, we've actually never had an animal be aggressive toward us, but we've definitely had a bunch of encounters where we've been face to face with big animals and where it makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. On the Grand Enchantment Trail this one night, it was just pouring rain, and we both had these big rain capes on that cover our packs and everything, so the rain's bouncing off that, so you couldn't hear anything. And we got to this water source where it was a developed water source where there was like a tank put out and a little spring dug that was filling it. So we're filtering our water out of that. And it was in the dark. It's raining heavily. It's loud. We've got our headlamps on. I filled up a water bag and turned to hand to Kathy. And as I did, my headlamp swept across the trail behind us, and it stopped on this young cougar that was like walking up the trail. So obviously this cougar was coming up to get water, and because of the rain, it couldn't smell or see or hear us. And all of a sudden, my headlight sweeps the trail, and I just come face to face with this cougar. And it was almost like a Scooby-Doo moment, where we both were like, huh?
Yeah.
He looked at me and I looked at him, and then I started to say cougar. And before I could even finish the word, he had jumped up on this big rock nearby and disappeared.
Yeah.
But a few different times it's been like that, where like cougars, when I've seen them, it's always been kind of unexpected. And it's always this moment where we're both shocked, where I'm shocked to see a cougar and the cougar's shocked that I'm seeing it. Because most of the time I think they just quietly watch as you pass on by.
Yeah. And figure, maybe that's a little too much effort they'll take to bring them down. So.
I mean, it happens every once in a while. And right now it's on people's minds because there have been a couple of cougar fatalities in the last couple of years. But in all of like European recorded history in the United States, there's been fewer than 50 deaths to cougar.
And probably mostly children, I would
exactly. Think. Right, because wild animals don't have health insurance, so they're normally not going to attack a 150 or 200 pound human, because if they get injured, it could cost them their lives. They're, even big things, even things like bears and cougars, they eat a lot of mice.
Really?
People don't think about that, but everything lives on rodents. I don't eat rodents because, like I said, we're vegetarian, but I actually accidentally killed a mouse one night in camp just because I stepped on it. Like, it was running around in the dark and I didn't see it, and I accidentally stepped on it and killed it. So I mean, obviously a predator, bears aren't proud. If they find a mouse, they're going to eat it because it's just a little protein snack. So.
Yeah Well, very cool. I almost called you by your name, but everybody knows you by Ross.
Yeah. Right.
Thank you for joining me in the brain, Ross.
Hey, thanks for having me, Drew. This was really fun.
Please like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that bell so you know when we put new videos out. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Brain Aqua. This has been AquaBrainTV. Remember to keep your head up and keep those knees bent.